Some days you just get up and you go to work, and then there's other days you get up and you say, I get to go to work. And today's one of those days. This event here is just one of the highlights of the many wonderful things that we have the opportunity to do here at the University of Idaho. So just as good afternoon, I'm Janet Nelson. I'm the Vice President for Research and Economic Development, and I'm really, really excited to welcome all of you. This is actually the third of the University of Idaho short and sweet talks, or the SAS talks. And it's really a great turnout. I'm really happy to see so many people here. Today, our goal is slightly different than some of our others. The theme will change, but today our goal is to highlight the global reach of our institute's research and creative activities. So first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for attending this event. It's so wonderful to see so many of our UI communities. I see faculty, I see students, I see staff, I see administrators, I even see local community members. So thank you so much for taking time out on this afternoon to join us. I'd like to just first of all say a warm welcome to a couple of audience members. First of all, our Vice President for Advancement, Mary Kay McFadden, is here. Thank you, Mary Kay. And also our Vice President for Infrastructure and Chief Information Officer, Dan Ewert, is here. Dan told me he wrote my opening remarks to him, so I think I'll just throw this away and hand the rest. So I do want to tell Dan, though, that the next time he goes to one of our planning meetings for our Moscow airport, he should take our flight map and say, this is why we need a big airport in Moscow, Idaho, right? So Dan has been really spearheading that effort, so thanks to all that. I see a number of deans and department chairs here in the audience, so if you want to just raise your hand, we'll take a look around. Looks great. And also, just around the state, we have folks from around the state, and I know that we have people here from Boise, from Idaho Falls, from Twin, from Coeur d'Alene, and I would just want to call out 3 of our executive officers have actually joined us, and it's so delightful. So Mike Satz and Charles Buck and Lee Ostrom are all here, so thank you for coming. Our format today, as if last year's SAS Talks, is going to be short and sweet. And what this means is each of our 9 presenters will give you a brief taste of his or her research, offering 20 slides for 20 seconds each. You can do the math. It's a little bit under 7 minutes, so if you are bored, you can do the real math. But we are really grateful to our speakers for working with us to squeeze their complex research topics and discoveries into this lightning format. It's not quite as easy as you might think. Our first 2 ORED SAS events last May and December a year ago were extremely successful, and we're hoping that today you'll feel the same way about these presentations, and we look forward to continuing this as a biannual event here at the University of Idaho. So before we get started, because today has a special theme, we've selected today's speakers from those colleagues who responded to an international survey, research survey that we began conducting in the Office of Research and Economic Development this last August. And at this point, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Dr. Scott Slovak. Scott is a faculty fellow in my office and a professor in the departments of English and Natural Resources and Society, to come up and offer a few words about the survey and some of our ongoing plans to celebrate and build our current international research efforts. Scott has helped to design this survey and has been really central to the organization of today's events. So here you go, Scott.
Thank you very much, Janet, and welcome everyone. Janet urged me on Friday to memorize my remarks, and I obviously have not done so. But our speakers will be speaking off the cuff in short sound bites, so rest assured it will be more spontaneous than this. As Janet mentioned, we've developed today's SAS Talks by using information that we began gathering this past August through an international research survey. So far, some 60 colleagues have responded to the questions about current and upcoming international research activities that we asked in this survey. But we're well aware that there are many additional faculty members at Idaho who are doing important work overseas and publishing and presenting their work in other countries. And we're using today's event not only to celebrate the international research that we know about already, but to encourage our colleagues across the university, including colleagues at our centers throughout the state, to send us information about their international activities through the brand new electronic portal that we're simply launching today. It hasn't been available in general until right now. And it's on the link on the screen behind me, and we're also distributing small cards at this event. They should be in your programs with information about the portal. Just a glance at this flight map graphic reveals the energy of our university's international activities. This image was created by several colleagues from iBest, and Janet will acknowledge them in just a moment. Imagine how crowded and exciting this map will be when many more of you have had a chance to report your work through the new portal, which will soon be forwarding to all deans and chairs and directors at the university, hoping to spur even more participation in this effort to survey our international work. The research we do at the University of Idaho is having a worldwide impact as well as a profound impact here in our home state. And finally, let me say briefly that in addition to today's talks, we're hoping to use the data we're collecting about the University of Idaho's international research activities as a way of bringing together groups of colleagues with similar topical and regional interests for informal conversations in order to catalyze future projects, perhaps even new relationships between our university and institutions throughout the world. So now let me return the microphone to Janet, who will be our MC for the afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Stay up here just a minute, please, Scott. So I wanted to say really just a couple of special words of thanks to Scott. Scott has been serving for the last 2 years as a faculty fellow in my office, and it's really been instrumental in a number of these projects. The coffee conversations he mentioned, the international survey, different ways that we can celebrate the reach of the research, the scholarship, the creative activity, and build our community to even do more and then celebrate even more successes. So. As you know, the SAS speakers all get a special award for participating in this series. And because Scott has been so instrumental and so helpful in this, I'd like to present one to Scott as a thanks for all his work.
Thank you.
Thanks, and before we get into too much more, I'd also like to just acknowledge several other members of the ORED team. We really are an ORED team or an ORED family, and 3 in particular, as well as 147 that I'm not going to name, are Jana Jones, Jeremy Tamsin, and Phil Bogdan. Can we say thank you? They've really played an essential part in planning and organizing today's event and helping to keep this a biannual event. So thanks, team. I really appreciate that. So a few little logistics and then we'll get started. I'm going to introduce each speaker for a few minutes before he or she takes the podium. You do have a program which talks a little bit about the presentations and the bios of our speakers. And these talks are also being recorded so that you can go back and use them later or watch them later, or if you want to share them with a colleague or a friend who wasn't able to attend, we'd love that. After the first 5 presentations, we're going to take an intermission. It's a very intentional break. And so during this time, there's going to be a couple of things to do. One is I'd like to invite you to enjoy drinks and some international foods that will be available on the 2nd floor. There'll be coffee and water available behind the atrium. You can get a wristband in silver or gold if you are over 21 and present a valid ID upstairs. And then after you get a wristband, the Office of Research and Economic Development is pleased to give you your first token for an adult beverage of your choice. There's also non-adult beverages that adults can have too. And we, as you know, those who have attended before, we do have a cash bar, but sometimes the Vice President of Research has a few extra tokens in her pocket. So you might want to come back and see me if needed. But I do have a special request for you. It's very important, and in our office we do try to be compliant, and do the right thing, it's really important for you not to take alcohol outside of this building. So I'm sure that we will have 100% compliance with that, but I just did want to mention that. But we invite you within the walls of this building to enjoy. So the intermission is really more, though, than a chance for you to stretch your legs and get some refreshments. What I'm really hoping that you do is to take this opportunity of the intermission to network with the speakers and with your other colleagues that are here, and ask questions and visit about the attendees about their research and the international event or international outreach that they're doing. That we really have a strong and robust research enterprise at the University of Idaho, and all of you contribute tremendous energy. We really enjoy your collegiality, and we want to have this time to network. Okay, so after we finish networking, we're going to convene again and have a group of 4 more speakers, and then again have a further opportunity for additional networking and snacks. And as well, for those of you who make it to there, a small token of thanks for ORED as a departing gift from me. So without further ado, let's start our first set of talks. I need to turn the page because I didn't remember to memorize mine either. So Carol Poaching Albrecht is our first speaker. We're going to begin our international journey this afternoon in 18th century Vienna, Austria, as Carol Poaching Albrecht, an oboist and music historian from the Lionel Hampton School of Music, takes us on a tour of palaces, churches, and municipal archives. All of you are probably aware and familiar with the music of Mozart and Beethoven, but do you know anything about the wider culture that supported their musical achievements? Curiosity about the lives and careers of these musicians, many of them opera singers, many of them women, drew Carol to begin this research as a doctoral student in 1998, and she has begun her career teaching at UI in the late 1980s. Carol taught herself to read survival German in order to live as a researcher in Austria, and learned how to read 18th century Korintschrift, which is an old-fashioned German handwriting, in order to tell the stories of forgotten figures in the history of classical music. Please welcome Carol.
Thank you very much, Janet and Scott and Phil and Jeremy for selecting me and helping me out here. My students will tell you they're really happy when I don't sing, but I do enjoy playing the oboe quite a bit, and I started my career as an oboist. But I've always been interested in the music of Mozart and Beethoven and the surrounding culture, and but they both wrote pretty nicely for the oboe. And it's really been a great joy for the past 20 years to make annual trips to Vienna for research. This is an opportunity I never could have dreamed. I couldn't have planned it, but it's just been a wonderful thing. But anyway, Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, lived in Vienna for about 10 years. And if you've seen the movie Amadeus, you're probably quite familiar with him. Ludwig van Beethoven initially came just on a study trip. He actually had a study grant from his employer in Bonn, Germany, but he ended up staying in Vienna because there was a little fracas called the French Revolutionary Wars. One of the iconic images of Vienna, of course, is St. Stephen's Cathedral. And for a short time, Mozart actually lived around the corner from it. He got married when he was living there, and you can actually look at his marriage record in the archive. A lot of the 18th century architecture still survives, and Professor Pamela Bathurst and I enjoyed a very wonderful dinner in a restaurant called Weinhaus Sittel, which you'll see in just a moment. But that's one of the neat things about Vienna, is that a lot of the 18th century atmosphere still remains. You can sit right at the foot of the big tree there and enjoy a nice dinner in the inner court. The base of the tree is about 8 feet long, and it was probably planted in 1752 when the building was erected. So anyway, we talk a lot about sustaining research, and by golly, that takes food. And, you know, you probably think of Wiener Schnitzel, you know, Vienna and everything. This is a Topfen strudel, which is nice pieces of flaky dough with a ricotta cheese and raisin filling with a big blob of whipped cream along the side. It just doesn't hurt. But one of the great things is that you can also see what the surrounding countryside looks like. And some of the people who in the 18th century used to live out here and have their fancy summer houses would hire musicians to play. The religious calendar is very important too. I was just talking with Florian over here about our favorite saint, Saint Florian. On the festival of Fronleichnam, or Corpus Christi, is a very important religious holiday, usually in May or June, and the archives shut down. So you have to go do something fun. The Palais Lobkowitz is a lovely building in the central city, and Prince Lobkowitz was a longtime patron of Ludwig van Beethoven. And the view here is just coming out of the music room upstairs, where a lot of Beethoven's symphonies were rehearsed and premiered. The theater was really important. The court supported this particular theater, the Burgtheater. It's the small building on the right. The one next to it is the Imperial Riding School. So I guess that means that athletics overshadowed the theater just a little bit. But then they built a bigger one, is okay. The court also operated another theater, the Territorial Theater, which has long since been torn down. But if you're familiar with Viennese culture, the soccer hotel, home of the soccer tort, and we're back to food, stands in the same place, and it looks pretty much the same. So I spend a lot of my time at this place called the Wiener Stadt- und Landesarchiv, the Vienna City and Municipal Archive, where I use a variety of sources: death records, estate records, housing and draft records, and then other catalogs to help fill in a lot of the details for the people I'm looking for. Right here, the document that's in front of me is an estate record from a singer by the name of Magdalena Willmann Galvani, who was one of Beethoven's early loves. He proposed to her, and she turned him down because she thought he was ugly and crazy. But one of the challenges, as Janet mentioned, is reading the old handwriting. And this is a particularly clear example. It's called Kurrentschrift, and most of the letters really don't look like their modern day analogs, but you have to decode that. This is a baptismal record, and all of these things together really help you find out things like familial ties. Estate records can give you a sense of a person's standard of living, of course, their familial relationships, occupations, all kinds of things. The Austrian Theater Museum Library is another one of my favorite places. It's located in the Lobkowitz Palace upstairs. And you can see that it's a pretty nicely laid out facility, very comfortable to work in. And the collections of playbills is really marvelous. These are great treasures. And normally what you'll find in them are the day's offerings in the two theaters, generally the Court Theater, the Burgtheater on the left, and the Territorial Theater on the right here. That's my husband, Ted, holding them up, and so you can see just how the format is. But it's a special treat. Sometimes you'll see concert programs, and I was just thrilled to find one day a playbill that pretty much wraps up my whole career. It was for an oboe concert by a man by the name of Sebastian Groman, featuring a completely unknown performance of an early Mozart chamber work that I like, and then an equally unknown young pianist by the name of Mademoiselle Kramer, whose name is Rosa. And then I discovered that she has an illegitimate brother, but I think my 7 minutes are up, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. It sounds like we have a teaser to ask about that illegitimate brother during the break. So I'd like to present you, Carol, with a little token of our thanks. And thank you so much for, let's see, for being here. Thanks, Carol. That cliffhanger, huh? I'm going to be thinking about that. So, remaining in Western Europe for another 6 minutes and 40 seconds. There, I'm giving you the answer. Let's next welcome Professor Gary Austin, who's been teaching in the College of Art and Architecture since 1991. Gary began taking a group of the University of Idaho students to Italy in 2000, and during these visits to Europe, he became to realize how advanced the cities there are with regard to sustainable development. Landscape architects and urban planners in such cities as Stockholm, Copenhagen, and Oslo are making local efforts to solve a global problem to aim to achieve carbon-neutral cities within just a handful of years. Today, Gary will give us a sneak preview of his book in progress on sustainable urban development, which will eventually help American architects catch up with their European counterparts. Please welcome Gary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No notes.
Do you have notes on this slide?
No. Oh, I did, but that's okay, I
Looks
guess.
like those ones didn't port over.
Okay. That's fine, as long as the others do, that's okay.
All right. So press that green button.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and would like to talk to you today about the green capitals of Europe and the sort of the challenges that America has. I visited 8 of the 10 capitals. These are competition winners, and I collected photographs and examples of sustainable development projects and techniques studying the political and the social conditions and the policies that foster them. Annually, major European cities compete for the title of the European Green Capital, and they compete in these 12 different categories. We'll touch on a few of those today. In this image, you can see high-density development paired with a high percentage of open space, which is unusual in American cities. Through sustainable development, we may address a number of contemporary challenges, perhaps the most important of which is climate mitigation and adaptation. Perhaps the most important challenge, Jeremy, I'm sorry, this is the wrong presentation. It should be this small.
This is the last one that I have.
It should be a 16 megabyte small.
This is what I have for you.
That's not what I downloaded on Monday on that laptop of yours.
This is,
Okay,
yeah, I'm so sorry, but this is what I have today.
all right.
If you press the green, it'll get you back.
So there are a number of challenges that we face, including the global warming, species extinctions, extreme heat, water scarcity, destruction of tropical corals, and also dislocations due to sea level rise. The Europeans are able to develop programs with very low CO2 emissions, in part because of disaggregated energy facilities. This is a neighborhood that has an energy plant where pneumatic tubes collect combustible material and organic wastes and then convert those into fuel. Copenhagen is able to achieve its low emissions by connecting 98% of the buildings to a district heating system. This is very much more efficient in terms of carbon emissions and very much lower in cost than the United States model. Europeans in the capital cities move around more differently than Americans do, and we'll have to make changes as in infrastructure and in housing density in the United States in the next few decades. Rush hour in Copenhagen involves thousands of bicycles and very few automobiles. In the example on the left here, you can see that infrastructure is the key to increasing bicycle and pedestrian use in the Spanish example. In contrast, Spokane is striving to meet 1% bicycle ridership. Sustainable development has also contributed to the positive quality of life in terms of privacy, security, affiliation, and these kinds of amenities, including light into multi-story buildings. This example is in a Stockholm neighborhood. Sustainable development also requires a concentrated planning effort that's coordinated between the municipal and the county agencies. This one shows open space systems that protect species that are endangered in Sweden. This is an example of a landscape that was degraded by agricultural use and then restored by the city, and now provides flood protection, traps heavy metals and other urban contaminants, and is also the breeding ground for the rare white stork in Spain. This is an example in Germany, in Hamburg. This is called the energy bunker, and it is an example of a local energy plant that heats water and provides electricity to multifamily housing that you can see here using a district heating system and a 500,000 gallon tank to store hot water. This is an energy park on a closed landfill, and this is a municipally owned energy system rather than part of a national infrastructure, and it provides electricity to about 3,000 local homes. You can see in this example that energy use in American multi-family buildings is about 3 times higher than in the counterpart in Stockholm. High-performance buildings in Stockholm have even better performance. It's key that municipal and county governments, as well as state and national governments, work together toward developing sustainable development programs, and also using private and public partnerships in order to sustain those development projects, as we rarely do in the US. In conclusion, there are a host of different programs that are used in Europe to address climate change and also the many other challenges of our contemporary life. And if you would like to see a full presentation of the full list of measures, I'm doing a lecture on March 21st in the University Auditorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That was great. We're looking forward to having another deeper dive into that in your upcoming works. And here we go. I have a certificate and a plaque for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So moving eastward towards the former Soviet Union, we're going to hear from Professor L.T. Hormel from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, who is going to tell us about her work on masculinity and sustainable gardening in the Ukraine. Using data that she collected more than a decade ago, LT is currently writing about the tension between the traditional family gardens and country homes, known as dachas, and the increasingly dominant system of industrial agriculture in that part of the world. In many ways, this research in the field of rural sociology is profoundly relevant to the cultural tensions we see in the agricultural regions of our own country, including here on the Palouse. This is the kind of international research that clearly sheds light on our stakeholders in the state of Idaho. So please welcome LT.
Hello, everyone. This research is based off of many years of me being over in post-Soviet societies, and I'm continuing it into looking at other places for societies to address changes during social change, I guess, a little repetitive. I've been supported in Russian language and culture from Eastern Washington University, University of Oregon, and have received lots of research support through the organizations listed via IREX, Fulbright Hayes, University of Idaho, Worcester State University, and my alma maters of yesteryears. I studied as an undergraduate and graduate student in Soviet, post-Soviet societies, the great changes going on, and I noticed that people had to increasingly deal with non-market types of activities to try to cope with social change. One of those being dachas, or what we call summer gardens. The municipal government of Komsomolsk, Ukraine invited me in 2001 to prepare research to do a quality of life study over in their city, and so I went there in 2002 for the first time in my life. Most of my work had been in Russia, so I went there in 2002 as my first adventure to Ukraine. I recruited 10 Ukrainian researchers. I conducted my own follow-up interviews with households, 28 of those also with experts. And then I also conducted ethnographic recordings of everyday life, both in the municipal government offices and the city. Komsomolsk itself is a company town that extracts iron ore. 38% of the workers in Komsomolsk are employed there. 64% of those workers are men. And during this time of economic change, a lot of men lost jobs, and it led to what researchers call masculinity crisis, that a large number of working class men especially experience dramatic changes in their status. In fact, status loss is what they experienced. And this was seen in many frightful kinds of statistics, such as an increasing level of suicide rates among men in Ukraine and Russia, much more so than even women in these societies. And this resulted largely from this job loss, but also from alcoholism, maybe from that job loss, as well as the conflicts in Georgia and Chechnya that were taking place at the time. So as you see here, men's life expectancy was way lower than most other industrialized countries. 54% of mine workers, for instance, even just in Komsomolsk, often couldn't count on having pay. So there were ways that I wanted to explore that we understand the crisis, but what are men doing who are working class, who are coping with this? How do they remain healthy if they are healthy? And so this led me to ask questions about the role of dachas, or what we call household gardens, where urban residents travel to be in the countryside to raise food. In Komsomolsk, 51% of households have a dacha and raise food. And largely that's because so many of them were issued gardens via Poltava Gok because they could not pay their workers. Dachas are one of the main ways in which labor-intensive types of crops are produced. So for instance, labor-intensive non-export agricultural production of berries and fruits, those are provided through subsistence gardens and dachas. So they are a major source for families to be fed. And as you see here, this is a graph from the survey that shows that most of the dacha plots were distributed right at the beginning of the 90s when manufacturing was plummeting and the only resource that these industries had was the land that they still owned to give people an opportunity to raise food. During interviews, though, I found that professional men who had not really felt much status loss, they'd figured out how to cope, tended to see these dacha plots as a Soviet relic. So here you see the mayor of the city kind of laughing about it, and he followed this kind of idea that we might as well just industrialize all of that and make large scapes with them. Whereas someone like Pavel, whose hand you see there, that's his winemaking system that he bragged about, felt a lot of pride in being able to raise food for his family. His status wasn't lost because even though he didn't get wages, he was able to be physical and be a man on these gardens. So my ultimate conclusions in this short and sweet talk are simply that dacha gardens are good for people's health. It keeps them from committing suicide, keeps them from being alcoholics, and even if they drink a lot, they're getting physical and working it out of their systems. But not so fast. Women don't enjoy that as much. And so what I also found is that women, while men and women worked a lot together in the countryside, women were stuck doing the canning, folks, and that's not as fun. So that's what we might call the patriarchal renaissance is still alive and well in that setting. My follow-up work is going to look at these kinds of healthy ways that we might take for granted in the midst of social change and in the midst of us commodifying a lot of things in our lives. And these are places that are safe havens for families to integrate their lives that are kind of outside of all of these other kinds of forces. I also have been so lucky to work with faculty from CNR, such as Lisette Waits and others, and also from CALS, who have allowed me to be part of their programs with NSF to work on student international research endeavors as well. So I want to continue those things. Ultimately, I thank you so much for inviting me here, and I'm so thankful to be done with this.
Thank you, LT. Let me give you this and a thank you note. And thank you very much for being here. Thanks, LT.
Thank you, Janet.
Well, now we're traveling due south, which is that way, towards the southeastern African nation of Mozambique. Wildlife biologist Ryan Long earned 2 graduate degrees in Idaho, a master's at the U of I and a doctorate at Idaho State, before joining a large collaborative research project at Princeton as a postdoc that led him to his current work on the spiral horned antelope, specifically the brushbeck species in the Gorongosa National Park. Did I get it? No worries. All right. As an assistant professor in the wildlife sciences in the College of Natural Resources, Ryan is an expert in studying the influence of body size on all aspects of large herbivore ecology. What he'll explain today, though, focuses on a tangent from the antelope work in Africa that reveals a special value of curiosity-driven science. Please welcome Ryan.
That's all right, I got it. I'll just do that. All right, well, thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at this event and to share a little bit about the work that I do internationally with you. So my research program revolves around the ecology of large mammals, and most of the projects in my lab right now are split pretty evenly between Western North America and Sub-Saharan Africa, the latter of which is why I'm here this evening. So I work in Gorongosa National Park, which is located in central Mozambique in southeastern Africa. Now for tonight, there's 2 key things you need to know about the park. The first is that most of the large carnivores were extirpated during a civil war that ended in the early 90s. And the second is that there's 2 broad habitats, the open floodplain habitat and forested savanna. And my graduate students and I have conducted a variety of different projects at Gorongosa over the last several years, including studies of crop raiding behavior by male elephants and how to prevent it, the behavioral consequences of tusklessness in female elephants, and relationships between body size and behavior of various species of spiral horn antelope. However, the story I want to share with you today actually has nothing directly to do with any of those projects. This story has to do with predator-prey interactions and the ecology of fear. So as you can see, direct effects of large carnivores on their prey are relatively conspicuous, and these kinds of predation events can also influence plant communities by reducing density of the herbivores that eat those plants. However, predators can also influence plant communities by altering the behavior of herbivores, and when that happens, it's known as a behaviorally mediated trophic cascade. Now, in the classic version of this type of cascade, herbivores avoid areas that they perceive to be risky, which often are also good foraging areas, and the plants benefit from the reduction in herbivory. Now, although these types of cascades have been amply demonstrated in some systems, evidence for their existence in large mammalian systems is limited and relatively controversial. And one of the reasons for that is that it's exceedingly difficult to experiment with large mammals in field settings, and as a result, a lot of the current evidence is considered to be equivocal. So one of the antelope species that we work with is the bushbuck, and this is an ideal candidate for testing some of these kinds of ideas. This diminutive little forest antelope is strongly dependent on woody cover to hide from predators, and it's almost never seen in the open. At Gorongosa, though, we've regularly observed bushbuck using that open floodplain habitat, perhaps due to a lack of predators. So the first step in determining whether we had a fear-driven trophic cascade was to experimentally reimpose fear and evaluate how bushbuck responded. So we did that by dividing our sample of GPS-collared bushbuck into treatment animals and control animals, and exposing treatment animals to predator sounds and scents, and control animals to white noise and saline. So there's two key results from that experiment. The first is that both floodplain and woodland bushbuck moved away from predator cues, but not from control cues. And the second is that only floodplain bushbuck significantly increased their use of woody cover following exposure to predator cues. So essentially, a risk caused them to start acting more like normal bushbuck again. So the second major component of a fear-driven cascade is that there needs to be some benefit to the herbivore of altering its behavior in the absence of predators. So we try to get at that by quantifying diet composition and quality by analyzing fecal samples, and by using ultrasonography to quantify nutritional condition of bushbuck using these two different habitat types. So on the y-axis here, this figure, you've got percent of the diet, and then you've just got all the various plant species that bushbuck eat on the x-axis. And what you can see here clearly is that there's almost no overlap in the diets of floodplain and woodland bushbuck. Floodplain animals are eating one group of plant species, and woodland animals are using a completely different set of plants. So we use that information to go out and quantify two metrics of nutritional quality in all of those different plant species: digestible energy and digestible protein. And what we found is that the diets of floodplain bushbuck were significantly higher in both energy and protein content than the diets of woodland bushbuck. So in this next figure, you're going to see two different metrics of body condition. You've got body mass on the left side and body fat on the right side for floodplain and woodland bushbuck. And although there was a fair amount of variation among individuals in this analysis, the general pattern here is that floodplain bushbuck were larger bodied and had greater fat reserves than their woodland counterparts. So the third component of a fear-driven cascade involves downstream consequences to the plant community of this change in herbivore behavior. And a broader analysis we did of diet composition of all the various herbivore species that use the floodplain fortuitously revealed a single plant species that's eaten almost exclusively by bushbuck, Bergia mozambicensis. So we used that plant in an herbivore exclusion experiment where we went out and we tagged pairs of Bergia plants in the floodplain. We measured a variety of traits related to their productivity, and then we built these tiny little cages around one plant in each pair to evaluate whether herbivory by bushbuck was suppressing Bergia productivity. So the results of that experiment after only 18 days were striking. Plants that were protected from bushbuck herbivory had significantly more leaves and flowers. They attained greater heights, and they covered a greater area than plants that were exposed to bushbuck herbivory, suggesting that bushbuck were indeed suppressing productivity of this plant on the floodplain. So to summarize the key results of our study, all bushbuck in our first experiment avoided predator cues, but floodplain bushbuck exhibited a stronger response by increasing their use of woody cover. Those floodplain bushbuck also had significantly higher quality diets that resulted in them being in better condition. And finally, herbivory by bushbuck suppressed productivity of one of their primary forage plants on the floodplain. So our study provides some of the first experimental evidence of a behaviorally mediated trophic cascade in a large mammal system. And the two primary predators of bushbuck are leopards and wild dogs. And the extirpation of those species from Gorongosa has released bushbuck from the fear of predation, altering both bushbuck behavior and plant productivity. So why is it useful to understand these types of cascades? Well, a recent study of some of the world's largest carnivores suggested that most of those carnivores are declining. And so if what we've documented at Gorongosa is a general phenomenon, then you can imagine the magnitude of the effect that these declines are likely to have on ecosystems as more and more herbivores become fearless. So I want to acknowledge my co-authors on this project, especially Justine Atkins, who's one of the PhD students on the Antelope Project in general, and is the lead author of this paper, as well as the various field technicians and park personnel that made this study possible. And thanks to everybody for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Welcome. So, traveling north and east to the Indian subcontinent, we turn next to Assistant Professor Florian Justwan, who has been teaching in the fields of international conflict and political psychology at the University of Idaho since 2015. At a time when we're struggling to understand the notion of compromise in American politics, Florian is studying territorial attachment and political compromise in his current research, which examines a contested region in Arunachal Pradesh, which is claimed by both India and China. Drawing from such disciplines as international affairs and behavioral economics, this work uses surveys of Indian citizens in order to understand why public opinions are sometimes fixed and others sometimes flexible. Please welcome Florian.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Before I get started with anything, I would like to give credit where credit is due. Much of the work that I'm going to discuss in the next 5 minutes or so has been co-authored with my amazing friend and colleague, Dr. Sarah Fisher at Emory and Henry College. For the past 5 years or so, Sarah and I have been fascinated by the topic of territorial disputes. So these are cases in which two countries disagree over ownership over a particular piece of land. Think about the Crimea dispute, for example. And as you can imagine, there's been a massive amount of research on that topic already. And the general question here is, or a key question here is, what makes those disputes oftentimes so hard to resolve? And the scholarly consensus here is that this is frequently due to public opinion, because hawkish public attitudes force governments into uncompromising behaviors. However, very much to the surprise of my co-author, we noticed that while everyone agrees that we need to study public opinion in this issue area, scholars haven't actually made the effort to conduct public opinion research in any claimant state yet. So this is where we decided to jump in. We wanted to pick a country with a few different territorial disputes, and we wanted to be the first scholars to conduct survey research on this issue. In particular, what we're interested in is who are the people who are in favor of territorial compromise solutions, and what makes them different from their hawkish counterparts. So we ended up picking India as our case study for a variety of different reasons. First, the English language is fairly widespread in that country. Second, virtually every single one of India's borders, such as this one here, is in some way, shape, or form contested. And third, it's a really interesting country that we wanted to learn more about. So Sarah and I traveled to India in the summer of 2016 to meet with survey firms and discuss a project. The goal of that trip was to find a partner that would agree to do a public opinion survey with us about a bunch of different territorial disputes. Upon arriving in India, we noticed that doing survey research in that country is kind of hard. It is one of the most exceptionally diverse countries in the world. By some accounts, there are more than 500 different languages spoken there. And that makes the collection of a nationally representative sample difficult. As a result, we decided to poll respondents in one of India's 36 different states, in the National Capital Territory of New Delhi. This is the political heart of the country. We decided to poll roughly 1,000 respondents and ask them about 2 different territorial disputes. The first one is about this region here, which is called Arunachal Pradesh. This is one of India's 36 states, but it is claimed by China as part of South Tibet. The other territorial dispute that we asked citizens about is about the area here called Aksai Chin. Aksai Chin is actually controlled by China, but India claims it as part of its own Kashmir region. In our survey, we then asked people about 2 different forms of territorial compromise. The first one is, can a respondent imagine a scenario in which she would support giving up parts of Arunachal Pradesh? The second one is, would a respondent support it if India gave up its claim to Aksai Chin in response to China giving up its claim to Arunachal Pradesh? This is what we call a claim exchange. What you see here is that both forms of compromise were very unpopular. The first one supported by only 5% of people, the second one only by about 20% of people. So for our purposes, the question then is, how can we explain these response patterns? And in our data analysis, we found 3 main predictors. The first one is what we could call foreign policy orientations. We know from previous research that people vary in their general outlooks on global politics. First, there are what we could call militant internationalists. These are people who think that global politics is a very Hobbesian, dog-eats-dog world. And what you see here is, the more that people buy into this Hobbesian notion, the less likely they are to support any type of territorial compromise. A second type of foreign policy orientation is what we could call cooperative internationalism. This is all about how much you value trade, treaties, the UN, and norms. And what we found is that the more people buy into this particular worldview, the more likely they are to endorse some type of compromise. A second big predictor of compromise attitudes is people's beliefs and fears about the future. What we noticed in our data set is that a lot of people were worried that any type of compromise with China would only embolden China to behave more aggressively in the future. What we then found, not surprisingly perhaps, is that the more people are worried that any kind of territorial compromise would only embolden China to become more aggressive in the future, these people are also less likely to offer any type of compromise. Last but not least, we also find that attitudes towards compromise have at least something to do with underlying character traits. Most importantly, the more positive someone's view about human nature is in general, measured by their degree of trust in strangers here, the more positive they feel about both types of compromise. So we've written up those results in 3 or 4 different papers now. Moving forward, we're going to team up with U of I colleagues Ashley Kerr and Graham Hubbs, and we're going to do some follow-up research in Belize. In particular, we're interested in the political psychology in Belizean citizens' attitudes about their territorial dispute with Guatemala. I can't wait to launch that survey in hopefully just a month or 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florian. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I hope that you're enjoying this trip around the globe. And before we break for our first intermission, I'd like to thank Barry Robeson and his team from iBest. Is Barry here? Are you folks here? I think they were here. He's walking through his lab right now. Barry heard his name. Here he comes to save the day. So iBest is the Institute for Bioinformatics and Evolutionary Studies, and Barry and his team have been really working hard behind the scenes on the data and the graphics for the SAS talks. And so Barry, come on up and we'll say thanks to you. I don't know if any of your team members are here today, but a few of them that I know have been just superheroes have been Caitlin Hill, who's been the data master, Cody Muir, who is the artistic guru, and Benjamin Oswald, who's the wizard behind the interactive globe graphics here on the website. So please thank me in thanking them for their work. And if you want to make Barry nervous, if everybody gets out their portable electronic device right now and starts entering their faculty data of their international research, let's see if we can crash Barry's computer, okay? Dan, do you support this? Anyway, I do hope that you will go back and encourage, if you have research, if you're a faculty member and have research, or your colleagues do, let's just imagine how that flight map is going to look at the next iteration. So at this time, I'd like to invite you to take a 30-minute intermission, enjoy drinks and refreshment and networking with our speakers and attendees. Also, if you're interested in a quick tour of this exceptional facility, Russ McClanahan is here, Russ, and he'd be happy to show you around. So thank you, Russ, in advance. And please enjoy the intermission. We'll see you back here in about 30 minutes. It's wonderful to hear so much merriment and so much joy. And I've had probably 40 conversations that I wouldn't have had I sat in my office and done emails. So I am so thankful to be here. Anyway, come on in, come and join and take your seats. If you're downstairs, there's probably a few empty seats down, or upstairs, there's a few probably seats that have opened up down here, but we still have a great turnout. Oh, and by the way, for all of you who have made it to this far, I feel like an infomercial. We have a little thank you present for you. And in terms of what we're celebrating tonight, our research, our scholarship, our creative activity, and ways that we're lighting the world with what we're doing here in Idaho, we have a short and sweet little beverage holder. And so as you leave tonight, you may pick up your short and sweet beverage holder, and then you can go to the people who left early or didn't come and say, see what I got? Anyway, yeah, make sure you pick one up on your way out. So welcome back. I really do hope you had a chance to connect with many people over the break. I did hear so many dialogues, and it's so fun to be here. This is part of really, I am serious about what gets me here in the morning and gets me here every day. And if you have ideas of research that's being done in your college or department that you would like to spotlight, just let us know, let me know, let Jana know, let Jeremy know, let anybody in our office know, because we are so looking forward to continuing this event for years and years to come, and looking forward to the contributions of all the great work that is being done across our campus and university statewide. So let's just jump right in. We got 4 presentations to go. So our next speaker is Lisette Waits. And before the intermission, if you don't remember, it was a half hour ago, we did hear about the complex psychology of compromise and the politics of transnational cooperation. And an understanding of these topics, though, would have really come in handy now with as we go to the lowlands of Nepal, close to the Indian border, where distinguished professor and department head of Fish and Wildlife Sciences, Lisette Waits, participates in the Nepal Tiger Genome Project with a team of local researchers and American colleagues. Using tiger fecal samples, and this ties the first half to the second half if you didn't catch that connection. We're going to, Lisette and her team are using tidal fecal samples to develop a genetic database. And using that, it's helping them to determine where poaching is taking place and ultimately hoping to trace tiger body parts that have been sold on the black market back to the location where the animals were killed and potentially to the poachers themselves. So what an impact. You may not know, but there are fewer than 4,000 tigers alive in the world today. And the Nepal Tiger Genome Project is helping to understand how many tigers currently live in the jungles of southern Nepal and northeastern India, and how this endangered species can be protected in the future. So please welcome Lisette.
So thank you for that introduction, and thanks to everyone for coming. It's great to see so many students and so many friends here in the audience. So I do a lot of different international research, but I chose this project to talk about tonight because it's one of the most interesting and unique projects that I've had the opportunity to work on. And tigers are such awe-inspiring creatures, but they're globally endangered due to habitat loss and fragmentation. And there were once 100,000 tigers in the world, and as you heard, there are now less than 4,000. And that led to a global effort to save this species. So in the areas in orange on this slide are the areas of the historic range of the tiger. And now it's found only in the areas in yellow. And that's 7% of the original historic range. And for the talk today, I'm going to be narrowing in on the border between India and Nepal in the Terai Arc landscape. And this landscape includes 3 protected areas, or multiple protected areas, as well as human settlements and agricultural zones. And tigers dropped to less than 100 individuals after the Civil War, but the government has been working extensively to increase the population size for tigers. My research uses non-invasive genetic sampling, things that animals leave behind in the environment, to track tigers. And one of the reasons this has really increased over time, because, as you can see here, there's a lot of opportunity to collect fecal samples. My collaborators on this project are Marcella Kelly from Virginia Tech, Kanjan Thapa, who was a PhD student at Virginia Tech from Nepal, who now works for World Wildlife Fund Nepal, and Debesh Karmachara, who runs the Center for Molecular Dynamics Nepal. So the goals of our project were to develop methods to monitor tiger populations using camera trapping and fecal DNA analysis. We wanted to estimate genetic diversity, gene flow, and connectivity, and develop a database that could be used for forensic analyses, as well as develop wildlife genetics labs and expertise within Nepal. So this started by 3 Nepalese researchers coming here to the University of Idaho to learn genetic methods. Also in 2011, I went to Nepal and taught conservation genetics workshops and returned again in 2012 to do additional training. Now, during my first visit to Nepal, I also had the opportunity to go to Chitwan National Park for the launching of this project, which is a collaboration between the US and Nepalese governments. We trained the local park guards, there was an official lamp lighting ceremony, and this was clearly really important to both the US and the Nepalese governments. This was also my first opportunity to see tiger habitat. And we spent 4 days in Chitwan National Park setting camera traps and doing surveys. And amazingly, much of this work occurs from the back of an elephant. Also, to my great excitement, there's a huge amount of poop, as you can see here in the bottom slide. So there are just amazing things to see in Chitwan National Park. We have wild rhinos, wild elephants, giant termite mounds, grass much taller than my head, and peacocks flying through the air. So I didn't see a tiger, but I did see their tracks. In terms of our research methods, we had a 15 by 15 kilometer grid spread across this 24,000 square kilometer landscape, which included protected areas, community forest, and the corridors between them. We set up camera traps in each grid cell, and we collected fecal samples in each grid cell. At the same time, we needed to establish a genetic lab in Kathmandu. One of those things required having our own solar power because the power goes out a lot there and it's just normal. So we had to prepare for that. Also, we had US dignitaries like the ambassador visiting our lab and learning about our research in Nepal. In terms of our results, we collected 770 fecal samples across that range. 50% were tiger, 40% produced an individual ID, and we detected 78 tigers distributed across those protected areas. Their genetic diversity or heterozygosity levels are moderate, around 50 to 60%. We also wanted to know, are they moving across this landscape? Is there a lot of gene flow? If so, this figure here would show one color, but you can see 3 colors, which is showing there was a restriction of gene flow among these populations, but there's mixing of colors, which also tells us there was migration between populations. We detected 5 migrants, 1 from Bardia to Chitwan, 2 from Chitwan to Bardia, and 2 from Suklafanta to Bardia. So next I'm gonna talk about our results from the poaching analyses. So we needed to develop a geo-reference database, and we were able to collect samples from 120 tigers, and these are the first genetic samples collected and analyzed in Nepal. We analyzed 15 putative tigers that had been poached. We did confirm they were tiger, and 9 were assigned to location. We found that Bardia was the hotspot for poaching with 6 of these tigers, 2 from Suklafanta and 1 from Chitwan. So our methods for camera trapping are now used to track the population size of tigers in Nepal. And you can see things are looking good for tigers in Nepal. They're really increasing their population size, and this is because of extensive government efforts as well as citizens to stop this poaching that was occurring. So we accomplished our goals of building wildlife genetic capacity within Nepal, and the Center for Molecular Dynamics Nepal has gone on to study many different wildlife species and to develop genetic identification projects for native fish and plants. I've been able to continue my collaborations with the Center for Molecular Dynamics Nepal and with the World Wildlife Fund, and I now have a Nepalese student who focuses on red pandas. And with that, I would also like to acknowledge all the funders and contributors to this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette. I'm on. From the contested region of northeastern India, it's a relatively short journey to Kathmandu, where we'll find applied linguist Balkrishna Sharma, who has been working as an assistant professor in the English department at the University of Idaho since 2016. Although he completed his PhD at the University of Hawaii, Bal actually grew up in the mountain village in Nepal, where he became fascinated with the interactions between foreign trekkers and climbers and their Nepali guides and Sherpas. His current research focuses on the foreign language signage in the Tamil neighborhood of Kathmandu, a tourist hub where Bal sees in the Nepali, English, and Chinese language signs the future of global tourism. The very nature of our human identity, our sense of being insiders or outsiders, is revealed in the languages used for signs on our city streets. So please welcome Bal.
Thank you, and this is a good connection between 2 speakers because my hometown and these animals' hometowns, that's the same place. We come from the same place. And thank you again, and this is an outcome of my academic research that's going on for the last 10 or so years in tourism and the role of language in international tourism. And I developed my interest in tourism because I grew up in a very touristy area in the western part of Nepal, and that was a very popular trekking destination. And then tourists frequently stopped on the way, and that's my village and my grandmother in between myself and my younger brother. And there's an elementary school in the background, and the trail behind me was a trekking trail. And I grew a fascination toward tourism because when I saw these tourism workers like porters and trekking guides working for tourists, I thought they were very privileged because they spoke English, and then they had the opportunity to socialize with Western tourists. And this is exactly when I decided to know more information about tourism. And then I chose my dissertation topic in tourism and the role of language in tourism. And for this presentation, I'm focusing on public signage, multilingual signage in a place called Tamil in Kathmandu. Tamil is a tourist hub that has restaurants, hotels, and shops for international tourists. And for today's talk, I'm focusing on specific part of that tourist enclave where we can see a growing rate and exponential growth of Chinese goods and languages there. And I argue that the global spread of English is giving rise to the commodification of language and culture, and this is a very key characteristic society of a transnational and post-capitalist era. Tamil grew as a popular tourist destination in 1960s and 70s. Western hippies traveled to Kathmandu to get marijuana and hashish for free. And with the arrival of Chinese tourists in recent years, there is more Chinese these days using Mandarin and Cantonese scripts, Chinese food, and lanterns on the streets and inside the stores. And part of the enclave has been developed with all those Chinese signs, and this is also known as the Chinatown of Nepal. And you can see that in local shopkeepers and other people are taking benefits of those linguistic signage and the changes in order to sell their items to outside tourists, mainly Chinese. So those who can read Chinese, this gives information about stores and items, and those who cannot read, this represents some kind of Chinaness or exotic Chinese identity. And for local people, these are ornaments or cultural objects to attach to other commodities and sell to outside tourists. And most shopkeepers do not speak Chinese, nor do the artists who draw these signs. And I asked a tourist whether he could speak Chinese, but he did not, and look at the response there. And they took help of Google translators, and they also asked their customers to write some text for them, and they would attach those signs to different objects and outside the stores and inside the stores. And its implications for other tourist languages like Japanese and Korean, these languages have been less popular in the recent years. And the local language, which is called Newari, that's the local indigenous language of the Kathmandu Valley, has been displaced, and you don't see really those Newari signs these days. And let's go inside the stores and see what kinds of signs you can see there. The signs speak to you, and there's a strong rapport between the speaker and the customers. And they draw on popular Chinese slangs and internet language and mostly the youth language there. And let's move to another sign and see the picture. The girl flew all the way from China to Nepal to buy a scarf, and she is riding on a scarf there. Is similar to those flying carpets that are found in Disney movies these days and also in ancient Chinese tales. And I talked to several Chinese-speaking friends, and they agree that these are very new literacy practices they have not seen before. And various studies in the past have reported that Chinese are very patriotic, and they're more patriotic when they go outside the country. And you can see those patriotism in those signs as well. And I asked the shopkeeper if he could understand the sign. He did not. And Diaoyu Islands have been a source of controversy, political controversy between Japan and China for some time. And this sign goes to those objects. And I also was interested in whether the shopkeeper understood what the sign meant, but he did not again. All they wanted to do was to sell the item to the outsiders. So let's come back to the general question of what this all means for the study of language and tourism in societies where the use of language is a new phenomenon. So in less capitalist societies where the commodification of language and culture has been one of the key features, of these societies, these changing linguistic signs and the symbols have been creating what can be called tourist bubbles. Means Chinese tourists come to Nepal and they're all linguistic signage, and then hotel staff speak Chinese, and they travel in Chinese airlines that make announcements in Chinese and distribute newspapers in Chinese, and they take part in those group tours where they have Chinese speaking tour guide. And these bubbles arguably create barriers for these visitors to experience cultural differences. And this means when we study the global spread of Chinese, it shows the global rising power of China in the world level through those linguistic signs, and also the Chinese language. And at the same time, these signs also indicate that they are the tools and sources of marginalization for other local languages and tourist languages. So this also helps us to conceptualize tourism in a new way. While Western tourism was based on cultural authenticity and self-discovery, Chinese tourism is more based on commodification of the objects and consuming these objects through shopping. Thank you for listening to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Bob, very much.
Mm-hmm. Sure, thanks.
So the global reach of the University of Idaho research also extends to East Asia. Here, Professor Jim Liu from the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering came from Taiwan to earn his master's degree at the University of Idaho, and then returned to Moscow to join the faculty in 1986 after completing his doctorate at Michigan and working for several years in industry. An expert in hydraulic engineering, and particularly in pipeline applications, Jim has studied oil pipelines for many years. But a few years ago, colleagues at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology asked him to join a research team to detect leaks in municipal water pipes. So Jim spent a semester in 2017 working on a project and is now involved in a multi-year effort, which he'll share with us today. So please welcome Jim.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Jenna. You are one of the very few people who got my last name right. Thank you. All right. For the next 7 minutes or so, I'd like to outline my research on pipeline infrastructure. And I got about 20 seconds for each slide. I already got 10 minutes extra for my first one. Okay, the pipelines I'm talking about involves the oil pipelines and the water pipelines. Oh, okay. Sorry, I cheated. All right, so I have been working in the industry for 10 years or so before I came back to University of Idaho. And my research in this area was got started by a fund from the Engineering Foundation. So here is a map of oil pipelines and natural gas pipelines. This shows you how extensive our fuel pipeline infrastructure is. And I've worked on about 5 or 6 of those lines through research funded by the American Petroleum Institute. And then this one shows the water pipeline system. Some of you might recognize this is the water system for the University of Idaho on campus right here. The other pipe, the other picture shows the condition of a line dug up for assessment. So we are drinking water out of those lines. And here's a pipeline accident happened in Bellingham, Washington about 20 years ago. Petroleum pipeline leaked and ignited and exploded, killed 3 people, and as a result of that, initiated a bunch of pipeline safety regulations. This is a pretty picture of a water main break in Malaysia. It looks pretty, but it's disastrous for the local people there. The consequences are pretty grave. Flooding, traffic, and the interruption for the business. So it's to be avoided. Less dramatic than those two pictures shown are the more problematic problems underground. Most of our pipelines we cannot see it. So we do not know its condition. So we will always wonder, will problem occur? When will that happen? And how certain our answer to those questions are. Okay. We can inspect pipelines through many ways. So one of them is physical inspection. We can use different technologies, acoustics, electromagnetic, fiber optics, and many others for assessment. This slide shows a robotic, basically, a free-swimming robotic called Pipe Divers, commercially available. It's launched into our operating pipeline. As it traverses through the lines to collect data, its position is tracked by the satellite. It can go into hundreds of miles to collect data. Okay. Another way of doing that is by computational pipeline monitoring. This is the type of research that I do. We use mass balance, we use impulse response, rate of change. Those are all the jargons in hydraulic engineering. We can use that to monitor what's going on in the pipelines. And one intuitive way of monitoring if you have a leak or not is to compare the inflow and the outflow of a pipe. If there's a difference, you think there's a leak. But the actual life is much more sophisticated because of the line storage and because of data noise. And because of data noise, the problem is stochastic. And this is another way of using hydraulics to monitor. And we extract impulse response. And that impulse response tells a lot of the pipeline, whether you have a leak or whether you have a blockage or not, and where are they. We can get that information from those data. Last year, I spent 6 months on my sabbatical at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and it was one of the better engineering schools. So it was a good opportunity for me to be there. The little picture here shows a water intake line from the sea. In Hong Kong, the water is very scarce. They use seawater to flush their toilets. That's something I didn't know before. And here's you can see the city, 7 million people, got 8,000 kilometers of water mains. The system is very vulnerable. And that big city is sustained by these 3 lines. Those 3 water mains importing water from China. And at a cost about $2 billion a year. With all that money spent, 20% of them is lost because of leakage. And because of this, there's a lot of research going on and drew a lot of researchers over there. So they have this project called the Smart Urban Water Supply System. The objective is to develop a diagnosis technology. It's kind of like a doctor trying to figure out how your artery works. And we'll have similar technology being developed there. And my participation there was I was a professor at the Civil Engineering Department, and I taught a 3-credit course on pipeline monitoring and the condition assessment. And I interacted with researchers from probably 5 or 6 countries, and served on the chair for the advisory board. This is one moment in the laboratory, interacting with a few people, friends now, and we're trying to figure out the acoustic wave transmission for different pipeline material, different pipelines there. As you can see, we had a pretty good time there. And this is 1/3 of the outdoor testing facility. This is a very, very valuable facility for us because the size is near the prototype size. And the new technology is being verified on this facility. And this belongs to the Hong Kong Water Department, so there's an industry support on that. And this is some results of a we try to detect the pipeline. You can imagine this line is about 140 miles long, very long lines. We only have an instrument on the two ends. And with that, we can detect a 0.5% leak with some confidence. And this is the monitoring situation. The red line shows the threshold. The black line shows the testing statistics. We can detect the leak with known rate of average false alarm and average detection delays. So that represents the current technology for monitoring our water supply systems. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you much.
So let's see, let's look at this flight map again. And for those of you who have been paying attention, you know that we've been moving across the globe. But where do we go next? Sometimes a research project is so intrinsically multinational that it's impossible to limit a report to a single region or a single country. And that is the case with Professor Shelly Mcguire's work on human breast milk consumption. Shelly, who directs the program in Family and Computer Science, was a faculty member at Washington State University from 1995 until just a few months ago when she joined her husband and research collaborator, Mark Mcguire, in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences here at the University of Idaho, and we're so delighted to have her. So the research that Shelly is going to describe today spans 4 continents and twice that many countries, and is expanding even as we speak. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, and even the U.S. Department of Defense have taken an interest in the research results on human breast milk consumption. This research draws on data from all over the world and has implications for the people and communities no matter where they live. This work exemplifies the global reach of our research at the University of Idaho. So please join me in welcoming Shelly as the final speaker.
Thank you very much. I know there's 6 minutes and 40 seconds left, so we can do this. Thank you all for being here. And I'm really excited tonight to be able to speak a little bit about our international work that we've been doing on human milk. And the title of my talk is Human Milk, Mother Nature's Quintessential Designer Food. So I thought I would start by talking about what is a designer food. What the heck does that mean anyway? Well, a designer food is some sort of food that contains a nutrient or other substance in higher amounts than normal and is thought to impart some sort of health benefit. My favorite sort of designer foods can be found in the dairy case, where you can find any combination of products such as lactose-free, fat-free, lactose and fat-free, grass-fed, and omega-3 rich milk. And to me, this seems a bit crazy because regular old cow's milk is just about as nutritious as it gets. But did you know that different mammals make milk with different compositions? These differences are thought to be driven by selective evolution over the millennia, resulting in the perfect mix of nutrients for that offspring. In this way, milk itself is a perfect example of a designer food, but in this case, the designer was Mother Nature, not a farmer or a food manufacturer. I need to confess that I've been interested in milk for a very long time. In fact, this picture was taken 30 years ago at our wedding reception, and yes, my husband and I toasted with milk. This is Mark Mcguire. We have been studying human milk and bovine milk for a very, very long time, and it's a really fun collaboration. And in fact, this topic has become even more interesting as we know that early life exposures like nutrition can affect health throughout the rest of our lives. This concept is referred to as the developmental origins of health and disease. We are especially fascinated with how variation in nutrient intake during the period of breastfeeding may help shape lifelong health. For instance, a few years ago, we conducted a study to examine whether variation in human milk composition affects inflammation. For this study, we sent human milk samples to the WSU Vet School. They told us that our milk was sterile, but when we used more high-tech methods, we found that it was not sterile at all. So it turns out that what we saw depended on how we looked at it. This next slide shows the main findings from that study. These figures illustrate the relative amounts of various bacteria in 3 milk samples collected from the 16 women who participated in the study. Each color represents a particular bacterium, and you can see that each milk sample contained various types of bacteria. There was quite a bit of variability among women, but each woman's milk contained a relatively stable microbiome. We then began an interdisciplinary collaboration with Dr. Courtney Meehan, an anthropologist who had been studying moms and babies in the Central African Republic for decades. Together, we found that the microbiomes in milk produced by women in the CAR are very different from what we find in milk produced by women living on the Palouse. That led us to the INSPIRE project, a very large study involving about 25 researchers around the globe. Those at the U of I are highlighted here in gold. Our basic hypothesis was that normal human milk microbiome varies around the globe. This sounds like a simple hypothesis to test, but actually it was quite tricky. This INSPIRE project involved 2 US cohorts, one here on the Palouse and another in California. We also had 2 cohorts in Ethiopia, 2 in the Gambia, and 1 each in Peru, Spain, Sweden, Ghana, and Kenya. In Ethiopia and the Gambia, we studied ethnically similar women living in urban and rural areas. So to rigorously test this hypothesis, we put together and shipped hundreds of sample collection kits containing all the supplies needed for all the milk and fecal collections. I'm not going to talk about that. And as to be expected, we ran into some interesting challenges. For instance, most of the kits we sent to Peru were confiscated by customs agents who wanted breast pump kits. I don't know. Instead, we ended up having to send them with families and friends. We also administered questionnaires assessing important variables like birthing practices, antibiotic use, maternal diet, household crowding, and the presence of farm animals in the house. We are just beginning to explore the wealth of this data. So those of you who are big data people, please come and talk to us. We have a lot of data. I'd like to show you just a few slides from the INSPIRE project. The first illustrates the milk microbiome in all the cohorts with Ethiopia on the left and our local cohort on the right. As you can see, there are some commonalities like the presence of Streptococcus, which is the dark orange on the bottom. That was in all the milk, but there were also noticeable differences, as you can tell here. On the following slide, I have the milk microbiomes from the 2 Gambian cohorts with the rural population on the left and the urban on the right. You can see that they're quite similar, which surprised us because these populations have vast differences in both lifestyle and in location. So we were surprised at this. On the next slide, however, I have the findings from Ethiopia, which are quite different. On the left is the rural milk microbiome, and on the right is the urban microbiome. And you can see on the left that there's a lot of red. That is rhizobium, which we consider to be a soil bacterium. And we have a couple hypotheses as to why there's so much rhizobium in the milk in rural Ethiopia. One is that the women eat enset, which is fermented in the ground. And the second is they practice something called pica, which means that they eat soil. So we are also finding that more intensive childcare practices, such as sleeping with the baby, are associated with the milk having more different types of bacteria in it, and also dietary patterns seem to be related to variation in milk microbiome. We've also begun to analyze our samples for other milk components, and here you can see milk lactose, which is generally considered to be the most stable component in milk. However, our data clearly show that there's much more variability in lactose than we had originally thought, and we wonder if milk lactose has been evolutionarily designed to be different in different populations. On the next slide is protein, and the line across there represents the value used around the world to set dietary recommendations for infants and to inform formula manufacturers as to how much protein they should add to their infant formulas. This value was set using protein values in the United States, which is very close to our Palouse values. But we're wondering, for example, if Kenyan babies need more protein. In summary, our international work strongly suggests that human milk may in fact be customized by a particular environment and culture to support well-being of infants in that environment and culture. We are currently using genome-wide association studies to help explore the possibility that selective evolution has helped shape these differences. And finally, for those of you who perhaps have not had an opportunity to work internationally, I want to encourage you to do so. With the technology that we have and the ease of travel, conducting international research has never been easier. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're interested in learning how we have pulled this off from the Palouse. We would be very happy to share our insights with you. Thank you. Thank you, Shelly. You are welcome. Woohoo, a trophy. Thank you. Fast talk. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wasn't that fantastic? And thanks again to all. Let's give another round of applause to all of our speakers for tonight. So I think we've just begun to just scratch the surface of the global reach and the impact that we are having here at the University of Idaho, in our state, in our region, in our nation, and across the world. And again, I'll invite you to participate in our survey, because I think we're closing in on 100 different projects. We've only seen a small sampling of them today, but there is so much going on. And even broader than the research, internationally, all of our research, scholarship, and creative activity is so important here. And I really want to say that thank you to you. I'm honored and I'm humbled to just be here, to be able to help celebrate what wonderful, wonderful work that all of you are doing. And it's just so inspiring to all of us. So I think we need a round of applause to everybody for everybody. Thank you. I just, as a closing, a couple words. One of the things that's important to me is to remember that we're not just here in Moscow. We at the University of Idaho have a statewide presence. And so as a sneak preview, we are planning a SAS Talks Roadshow, and we're going to be taking this around the state. So if you have ideas of how we might plan this better, let us know now before we do it wrong the first time, and then you tell us how we did it wrong, because we'd be really thrilled to take this across our state and show our different communities some of the wonderful work that our students, our staff, and our faculty are doing here at the University of Idaho. And again, thank you to all of you. So I appreciate you spending the time with us. We do still have some time to mingle. For those of you who are out of drink coupons, I might just happen to have a few more. And, and of course, we'd like to share with you our thank you gift for our short and sweet series. And I'd like to say personally thank you to these. So Lisa, I'm going to be over here at the kitchen coffee bar, handing these out as you go. If you'd like to take one along, please feel free to pick one up. We hope to see you probably in May, because I hope to intend to keep this show on the road. So thank you again for coming.